I have always taken pride in my strength to smile, be polite, and well-mannered, no matter how I actually felt. That's why I was shocked when, in a new city, among new people and colleagues, having transferred to a new company, I visited every department and introduced myself, except one. In the office sat about 10 people, none of whom were interesting enough to describe, except him, another stranger. I appropriately introduced myself to everyone with a handshake, and while they were all obviously staring at me, I nonchalantly passed by the stranger, boiling with shame inside for behaving that way. It's true that I follow my instincts, but I didn't even get the chance to properly look at him before my body refused to shake his hand or acknowledge his existence at all. The awkwardness in the air was quickly overlooked due to the speed of events. Drenched in shame, red-faced, and with my heart pounding, I left the room. Something wasn't right. It felt like that wasn't me. I sensed deep down that something wasn't right. Yet another of the many situations where something wasn't right, but I couldn't understand what due to my disability. The fact that the gods had granted everyone the ability to remember all their past lives, except me, made everyday situations harder for me. Even as a child, other kids called me strange, different, and as an adult, even crazy. In a school for disabled children, I was the only student because I didn't know anything from past lives and had to learn history, geography, and other subjects, while the other children didn't need school since they carried all the knowledge from before. My parents did their best. When I say parents, my father was so ashamed of me that he lost his hair, but my mother took me to countless doctors, neurologists and psychiatrists. No answer. Psychiatrists and psychologists. Nothing. A gynecologist suggested performing surgery on my uterus, to which my mother replied, "Try that surgery on your daughter." An ophthalmologist proposed eye surgery, to which my mother responded, "I hope yours fall out," and she gave up on doctors altogether. I was completely healthy, medically speaking, but no one could find an answer to why I was the only one who couldn't remember my past lives. Surely there must be someone like me, but not in my ecosystem. As a young woman, I tried every possible alternative medicine method. Regressive hypnosis, various tapping techniques, spinning around, granny's energy healers, grandfather's clairvoyant, tarot readers, gypsy fortune tellers, teas. They all concluded that I had forgotten some horrible death, but no one could go beyond that. My file was stamped disabled, as if it wasn't already hard enough to live with my own mark. Because of this disability, today once again, I couldn't understand what wasn't right. The other non-disabled snobs would also have these sensations, but they would recall their past bad affairs and work on correcting them. The gods had revealed to us that the purpose of life is to correct the mistakes of past lives. I, therefore, had no purpose. For a while that day, as my unease didn't subside, I thought about possible previous scenarios with the stranger, but as I kept going in circles, listing possibilities without any confirmation, I made a decision. Since he had caused such intense discomfort in me, whatever it wasn't good. Even though we work at the same company but in different departments, no one would notice me avoiding that man. For months, I still hadn't introduced myself to him, and when we'd be at work gatherings, I gave him an angry look to let him know he shouldn't speak to me either, and it worked perfectly. People with angry expressions are usually just afraid, but no one said people got wiser after 100 lives to once and for all remember that. Quite the opposite. I always wondered what they were like 100 lives ago, given how stupid they are now. But not him. One evening, around 11, which in my line of work is after hours, the landline in my hotel room rang. I've always been afraid of the phone because I never know what the person on the other end will say, and besides, mobile phones already existed, so the hotel's ringing upset me quite a bit. Still, I answered. Oh my God. A deep, sexy male voice, calming and smiling. It was him, the stranger. Since my bitch mask is dominant, I naturally asked him where he found the nerve to call me in my hotel room after hours. Sexily smiling and quiet, he explained that we were assigned the same project and needed to coordinate between our two departments. Normally, I wouldn't accept that explanation, but for some reason, this time it was enough, and the conversation continued, quickly shifting from business to intimate after just a few sentences. I relaxed, lowered my guard, and expressed myself in a dialect of a cat. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling I simply call intensity. The hatred I initially felt towards him shifted into butterflies, though no longer in my stomach, not even in my chest, but in my uterus. We whispered for hours, and at one point, he revealed something shocking. He, too, was disabled. Intensity surged through my mind. Could it be true? As a typical woman, which I usually avoid being, I couldn't help but wonder, did the gods intend for the two of us to be together? But after that night's conversation ended, I washed my face, lit a cigarette, and gathered myself. The stranger had been married for years, with 2 children, and I don't need that kind of drama in my life. I woke up the next morning strong, determined to resist the intensity. It didn't last long. When I came down to the hotel terrace to have my morning coffee, bathed in sunlight, I saw him in the park in front of the hotel with a boy about 5 years old. He clearly didn't want to resist. He wanted me to meet his children. I attended his live performances. Outside work, he had a band. He sang to me. At work, if you had just once think about it, you would easily see that we were intense. Luckily, people don't think. Conversations that lasted hours every night before bed became a ritual. Whether I liked it or not, I was quickly consumed. But the strange feeling, the sense that something wasn't right, never left me. I just replaced it with the thought that it was the feeling of being destined. The word strange was no longer enough to describe the situation, but its presence had definitely grown stronger. No matter how strong our desire to unite was, it was impossible. On our first attempt at a kiss, a pigeon crashed into the large window. All bloody barged into the room, and the glass shattered. He had to sneak out the back so I could call the reception. On our second attempt, the hotel's fire alarm went off. We all had to evacuate. He snuck out the back again. Third time's the charm. Colleagues interrupted us by banging on my door, inviting me to join their party next door since they knew I was there. The back exit. This started turning the intensity back into discomfort. One evening, he rushed in unexpectedly, out of breath, saying, "We're going to kiss now, even if the hotel starts to collapse." Although the gods had been keeping us apart all this time for reasons only known to them, seeing that we obviously weren't going to listen to them and learn our lessons, they finally gave up on us and let happen what they had been protecting us from all along. The intensity became a sensation. After so many failures, waiting, and attempts, everything happened like on a merry-go-round. Everything spun, colorful lights flashed with no warning of possible epilepsy triggers, a retarded melody blared on repeat, and finally, we became one. We united. Looking back now, I'm sure the gods were laughing, but I, already angry at them because of my disability, had made peace with them as a child. If I serve them by making them laugh and bringing them joy while they take care of the rest of humanity, then go ahead. It's my pleasure to make you happy for others. Maybe the gods were indeed laughing at the moment we united, but we definitely weren't. Like a sudden cut, the intensity brought a feeling of death. In a single moment, united at last, we saw our past lives. I was a healer, but even in this modern age, people would call me a witch, a word that, unfortunately, has taken on a terrible meaning. Back then, I brewed potions, helping people heal, see clearly, and remember themselves and their desires. I performed rituals in gratitude to Mother Nature and in honor of the gods. The gods loved me. They didn't mind that a human being was helping them. People were afraid of me. Anything unknown frightens people, and when they are afraid, they hide it with aggression. In that moment of union, alongside the feeling of death, I saw male hands gripping me tightly under my arms, dragging me across the ground. My long black hair was disheveled. My white dress was muddy, my bare feet were bloody, and I cried, begging for mercy. The crowd spat at me, insulted me. No wonder I have no man or friends today, that I sit at home alone, writing, afraid to go out among people. Then came the tying and the bonfire. Several years later, when the stranger wrote me his first and last letter, he informed me that in that moment of union, he hadn't seen me until I was being dragged through the mud. He saw himself as a ruler who wanted to show the people his power by personally burning the witch as an example to others. And that's where we met. The stranger burned me at the bonfire in a past life. to the joy of most who were present. It was the gods who were merciful to me, making me forget, but him too, so that he would never seek me out in this life and either repeat the scenario or, as happened, made me remember my past one. The moment passed. In horror, we separated and looked at each other. His eyes full of tears, he whispered, barely audibly, "I'm sorry," and we never saw each other again. Separated, he did not atone for his sins in this life, and I don't believe he will in any future one either. Because I began to understand. I never had anything to feel guilty about, nor anything to be ashamed of. First, I spent a long time freeing myself from feelings of guilt, shame, and embarrassment, then accepting and understanding the nicknames weird and different. Finally, I started to remember myself, all my past lives, and I have come to like myself. But one thing bothers me. A few years ago, this little rhyme formed in my head, and it doesn't leave me when I wake nor when I go to sleep. Burn the witch, they said, all blind to her grace. In their flames, she found power. From the ashes she raised. There once was a witch, all loving and true. Now you've created a witch that is coming for you. Next story. My mother used to tell me there were steps for falling in love. It was her favorite story to tell me, probably because she wanted me to be able to believe that love truly existed, even after the man I was supposed to call Dad up and left in the middle of the night. She wanted me to believe that out in the world, somewhere, someone would be the one for me. That magic truly existed. Every Friday night, after she got home from her part-time job at the pub downtown, her second job, she would come into my room after the babysitter left, and she would sit on my bed and talk in a soft voice and tell me stories of a magical love, one that would make the sun smile down on earth and make the stars shine a little brighter. I would pretend to be asleep, but she always knew I wasn't. She told me that if I followed the steps properly, I would find that one person, my person. And while I always knew she was making them up for my benefit, they kept my hopes alive that there was still good in this world. Step number 1. Find someone who is so beautiful, they make your heart skip a beat at the sight of them. The first time I see her, she's bursting through the doors to the lecture hall, dripping wet. I almost laugh at the sight of her, drenched in rain, and yet still pushing her hair out of her eyes, as if to recover from running through the rain late to class. Raindrops fall off her eyelashes into the growing puddle of water at her feet as she takes in the class, who are now all staring at her. She takes the closest open spot, a few seats down from me, in the row ahead. I watch as she wrings out her hair and tries to brush through it with her fingers. It's long and brown, and even wet. I can tell it has some curls trying to hold their shape. From that moment, I know she's come straight from the stars. Step number 2, talk to them. Find out their name. At our next lecture, I sit next to her. Amelia. It took me all week to figure it out, but I finally found someone who knows who she is. This time, her hair is piled on top of her head in an intricate bun. A few pieces stick out here and there, and I feel the urge to reach up and tuck them in. Halfway through the lecture, her elbow knocks her pencil case onto the ground. I lean over to pick it up, placing it in her outstretched hand. Her face turns red. Thank you. Honestly, I'm such a klutz sometimes. She smiles up at me, and for a moment, I could swear there was no one else in the room but us. I decide then that I will do anything to earn that smile again. The next day, I see her in the dining hall. She's eating alone, although I could bet that's by choice, and looks thoroughly enthralled in a book. I get my chicken wrap and coleslaw and kick out the chair across from her. She glances up at me through strands of hair that have fallen in her eyes. Hey, you're in my economics class, right? I'm Anthony. I wait until she grins before setting my food on the table and sitting down. Yeah, I remember you from yesterday. I'm Amelia. I already knew that. I don't say it out loud, because scaring them away definitely wasn't one of the steps. It's not long before we're sharing halves of our different kinds of cookies they rarely have in the dining hall and talking about the things we miss most from home. What I don't tell her is that I'm not even sure I have a home anymore. Step number 3, get to know who they are, who they want to be, what they want to be. I imagine her smiling up at the sky, just like I am, as I twirl her hair around my finger and wonder, how is it possible of all the people on this earth she chose me to spend the afternoon with? I can only partly stop myself from grinning like a bloody fool every time I see her. We lay with our heads next to each other on a blanket in the grass, beneath the biggest tree on campus. The leaves are red and orange and are like a canopy over us, protecting us from the world surrounding us. Because here, in this moment, nothing else matters except for this girl beside me. Where do you want to go most in the world? She asks me. Even though I can't see her face, I imagine her big brown eyes blinking up at me in that questioning way they do. I pause to think about it for a minute. Wherever is furthest away from home. I finally say, but right now, in this moment, I don't want to be anywhere else. Okay, sappy much? She says with a laugh. A handful of brightly colored leaves land on my face. Your turn, weirdo. What do you want to do? Not just for today, but for the rest of your life. If you had to graduate right now and pick a job, any job, what would it be? The sound of her breath quickening makes mine do the same. If only in anticipation of what she's going to say. She doesn't say anything for a minute. Everything. The word is whispered, and I imagine it as a spark, coming out of her mouth and captivating my entire being. I want to try anything and everything, do as much as I can do in a single lifetime. I want to see the world. I want to help people. I want to live. We breathe in sync for a moment, a perfect moment. Her breathing is heavy and quick, as if talking had tired her out. Well, now I can't say anything after that answer. It was poetic. I think the poets would disagree. Who are they to decide? Okay, serious question. On a scale from 1 to 10, how good looking am I? She rolls onto her stomach and tugs the drawstring on my hoodie tight, pulling it down over my face. I stand up and pull her up too. I grab her hand and pull her toward the center of the common, where someone has raked all the leaves into a huge pile. We run to the middle and fall down, the leaves swallowing us up until we truly are the only ones here. Step number 4, tell them you love them. 1 week, when she doesn't come to class, I know something's wrong. I text her, and when she doesn't answer, I slip out the back of the lecture hall and call her. She still doesn't answer, so I walk to her dorm. I knock, but no one answers, but when I call her again, I can hear her phone buzzing inside. I would never barge in, but by now I'm worried and I try the door and it's unlocked, so I slowly push it open. Her roommate is gone, but there she is, lying in bed, being swallowed alive by the comforter. At first I think she is asleep, but then I see that her eyes are open, staring at the blank spot on the wall across the room. I stay by the door when I whisper her name. When she doesn't so much as blink, I step closer, until I see her eyes, no longer wide and full of wonder. They're hollow, as if someone had sucked the life out of her. This is what scares me the most, because what is Amelia if not full of life? I fall to my knees beside her bed and take her hand that's hanging off the edge. I brush the hair out from her eyes. Amelia, can you tell me what's wrong? I want to help. Please. I wipe the streaks that tears have left on her cheeks with my thumb. Her eyes drift to meet mine. Her voice is barely a whisper when she speaks, as though she's scared that speaking it out loud will make it true. Whatever it is that caused her to lose hope like this, it's back. When she doesn't say more, I cup her face with my hand. What's back? I ask softly, afraid to add to the pain that's so evident in her eyes. She pulls away, sitting up and leaning against the wall. She squeezes a pillow against her chest and pulls her legs up, hugging them so hard I fear she might break apart. I climb onto the bed next to her and sit just like her. She turns her head and rests it on her knees, as if she doesn't have the energy to hold it up anymore. Cancer. It's back. Worse. She waits for me to say something, but the breath is knocked from my lungs, and suddenly I'm waiting for air that doesn't come. How? I manage to choke out. She squeezes her eyes shut, as though it pains her to relive the story. I missed the entirety of sophomore year. Tumor in my lungs. It went away. It was supposed to have gone away. A tear slips down her cheek. I catch it with my thumb before it can fall. Last month, when I had the flu, I never really got better. A week ago, I went into the hospital to get a scan. I didn't think anything of it. I only went for my mom. She was worried. But they called me back with the results, and her voice drops to a whisper again. It's back. It's spread. How long? For weeks. A strangled sound escapes my throat. I've just found her, my person, and now, she's going to be pulled away from me. She starts to sob, and I wrap my arms around her, holding her tight against me. We sit there for hours. Neither of us says a word, just sit there, clinging together as if it's already been 4 weeks and it's our last day. Finally, she shifts so that she can gaze at me with those wide brown eyes, except now they're red and puffy. She cups my face with her hand. Anthony, you don't have to do this. You don't have to stay. You could pretend you don't know me. I wouldn't hold it against you. I don't want you to have to go through this too. It would hurt too much. It can't break you too. In response, I tighten my grip around her. I am not going anywhere. I will be with you until the end, whoever soon or far away that may be, and I promise you, we will get through this together. Silence. For a minute. Anthony? Yeah. I love you. I grin. I love you too. Step number 5. Show them that you're there for them, always. As the next weeks pass by, I do everything I can to slow them down, but it's not enough. I can see her fading away. Soon she will be nothing at all. Nothing more than a memory. A memory that will surely leave a hole in my heart. Her parents and sister come and stay in an apartment a block from the hospital. Every time a new test or scan is done, all I can think is maybe today is the day. Maybe she's healed. There's never good news. Soon, they hook her up to a machine to help her breathe. When she starts coughing up blood, I think of when I was in a hospital room exactly like this one, thousands of miles away, watching my mother go through the same thing, watching her deteriorate into nothing, just as I will watch Amelia. Maybe I'm not meant to have love. Maybe everyone I love will die. She writes in a notebook all the time, even when her hands shake from the effort of holding up the pencil. When I try to read it, she laughs and sticks it under her pillow. You'll see soon. She promises. Step number 6. Buy a ring that captures the starlight in their eyes. It's been 2 weeks and 4 days since she got the news. I go out in the afternoon, while she's napping. Her sister promises to call me if there's any news. The streets are bustling with people. I wander up and down them until I find a jewelry store. The ring I find glistens in the sunlight and looks like it holds 1,000 stars inside. As soon as I see it, I know it's perfect. Later that night, I will Amelia up to the rooftop garden. I made sure it was the perfect night, clear so you can see the stars. I sweep my arms under her and carry her over to the bed I made of pillow and blankets. I thought you should get to see the stars. She tilts her head at me. A sad smile spreads across her face. One last time. She finishes. Sighing, she leans her head on my shoulder. I'm not afraid of dying. I thought I was going to die when I was 16, but I got another chance. She looks over at me, and I'm really glad I did. I met you, and you grew flowers in the deepest parts of my soul. I press a kiss to her lips. You really are a poet. You know that? She smiles lazily, the kind she used to smile before we had anything bigger than midterms to worry about. I think we're both poets. Are poets not just fools with fancy words? I reach into my back pocket and pull out the ring box. Her mouth falls open at the sight of it. We both know. You know I'm not going to dash, Amelia Jane Larson. Ever since we met, you have healed the deepest parts of me that I didn't even know needed to be healed. You have shown me what it is to truly be alive. We might not get the chance to grow old together, but that's okay. I want you to wear this as a reminder that even though it might not seem like it, you're still every bit alive as you were before. And as a reminder to wait for me, in eternity. She grabs my face in her hands and kisses me as if it's the first time we ever kiss, or the last. Anthony Lucas MacDonald, I would love nothing more than to wait for you in eternity. She pauses. But you have to promise me something too. You have to live for me. Do everything I couldn't do, because I want you to be able to truly live. And then we'll be together again. We hook pinkies like we're children and laugh. I promise. I take out the ring and slide it onto her finger. I try to ignore how thin and pale her skin is, just wanting to enjoy the moment. We lay down on the makeshift bed and point out constellations. Step number 7. Till death do us part. It happens so quickly. 1 minute, I'm lying next to her on her bed, listening to the sound of our hearts beating nearly in sync. The next, the heart monitor starts beeping and I'm clinging on to her, begging her to stay with me, to hold on a little bit longer, to take another breath, just one more breath, for me. But her beautiful, wonder-filled brown eyes are already closed and her lips are a sickly blue and her skin is nearly translucent, and I watch as the last shattering breath goes out of her, and then it all stops. The beeping and the nurses shouting, and the sound of her heart beating in tandem with mine. It all stops and then I am shaking. I am shaking and clutching the body of the girl that changed the entire trajectory of my life. I hear someone screaming and it might be me, but I can't be sure because all I know is that she's gone and that's all that matters. She's gone and now, all I have are memories of people who once loved me. Later that night, after they've taken her away, and somehow I found my way back to the garden, I pull out her journal. Somehow, I know she wanted me to read it. I flip it open to the first page, which is dated 2 days before she found out the news. Dear Anthony, even though they still haven't called me since my scans, I know I am dying. I can feel it. The familiar feeling, which I haven't felt since high school, slowly creeping back into my body. So I've decided to write down all the things you have to do once I'm gone. All the places you have to see, and the things you have to experience. And maybe, once you're done, you'll have lived enough for the both of us. I think you were right with what you said about the poets. I think we all have a little poet inside us, in the way everyone sees the world differently. Now, I need you to go find out how you see the world. And when you're done, we'll be together once more. Next story, the soothing scent of lavender filled the yoga studio, blending with the soft hum of meditation music. A delicate warmth enveloped the room, courtesy of dimmed overhead lights and glowing candles. Zoe unrolled her mat in the far corner, just where the sunlight trickled through the frosted windows, casting patterns on the polished wooden floor. She took a deep breath, trying to ground herself. Yoga had become her ritual, the one place where she could disconnect from the noise of everyday life and reconnect with herself. As she sank into a sensual cat-cow position, the fabric of her yoga pants hugged her curves, accentuating her full, round derriere. The thin, almost sheer material caressed her hips and thighs, making all the guys in the class stare. She couldn't help but think about the man who had caught her attention just a few spaces away. He was moving with the kind of practiced ease and grace that comes from years of experience. His form was strong and lean, and she could see the definition of his muscles through his tight tank top. When he transitioned into a downward dog, she found herself staring at the bulge in his pants, her mouth watering as she imagined what lay beneath. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she felt an odd connection to him, as if they had been together before. There was something undeniably magnetic about him, something that made her heart race and her feel wet with desire. She bit her lip, trying to focus on her practice, but her mind kept drifting back to him. As the class progressed, the instructor guided them through a series of increasingly challenging poses. Zoe found herself struggling to maintain her balance, her body responding to the man's presence in ways she couldn't control. Every time she caught a glimpse of his toned abs or powerful thighs, she felt a rush of desire that made her knees weak. As Zoe continued through the poses, she couldn't ignore the magnetic pull towards this mysterious man. His flexibility and strength were evident in every movement, and she found herself imagining how it would feel to have those powerful hands running over her body. The instructor's voice seemed to fade into the background as Zoe fixated on the man before her. The man, in turn, noticed Zoe's lingering presence. His eyes traced her toned figure, admiring the curves that were revealed as she slowly rolled through her poses. He licked his lips involuntarily, wondering what she might taste like. The class went on, flowing seamlessly from one pose to the next. By the time they reached the final pose, Savasana, Zoe was deep in thought, her body still but her mind restless. The instructor's voice drifted through the room, guiding them into relaxation, but Zoe couldn't let go of the strange pull she felt toward the man. As the class ended, Zoe lingered on her mat, watching the others slowly gather their things and leave. The man remained, stretching in a seated position. Zoe hesitated, unsure if she should say something or just let the moment pass. But the feeling wouldn't let her go. She stood up, slowly rolling her mat, her eyes drifting toward him again. He looked up and met her gaze. This time, neither of them looked away. "Hey," she said, her voice soft, unsure. "Hey," he replied, a slight smile touching his lips. "You're good at this." Zoe chuckled nervously, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thanks. You too." They stood there, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. Zoe felt her heart quicken, the same unexplainable sense of recognition rising again. "Do I know you?" Zoe asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. The man's face brightened slightly as if he were trying to pull something from the depths of his memory. "I was just about to ask you the same thing." Zoe laughed lightly, but the sound was strained. "Maybe we've crossed paths before. Yoga class?" "Maybe." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But it feels like more than that, doesn't it?" Zoe nodded slowly, her mind racing. "Yeah, it does." "I'm Ethan, by the way," he said, offering a hand. "Zoe." She shook his hand, and the moment their skin touched, a flood of images rushed through her mind. The smell of pine trees, the feel of soft grass beneath her feet, the sound of laughter echoing in the distance. A place she hadn't thought about in years. "I think," Ethan began, his voice trailing off as if he were searching for the right words. "I think we met a long time ago." Zoe's breath caught in her throat. "Silver Lake," she whispered. Ethan's eyes widened. "How do you know about Silver Lake?" Zoe's heart began to beat faster. It was impossible, yet here they were. "I spent summers there when I was a kid. My grandparents had a cabin near the lake." Ethan's face softened, and he sank back onto his mat as if the weight of the realization was too much to bear standing. "I spent summers there, too, with my aunt." Zoe knelt down in front of him, her mind racing through the fragments of memories she had long forgotten. "There was a boy. I spent the summer with this boy. We used to sneak out to the lake at night and talk about everything. Life, the stars, everything." Ethan nodded, his gaze distant as if he were seeing the same memories unfold before him. "I was that boy. You were Zoe. I was 14. You were 15. Zoe couldn't believe it. Ethan, the boy from her childhood summers at Silver Lake, was right in front of her. She remembered those magical nights by the lakeshore, the feeling of his hands trailing down her breasts, his lips pressing against her neck, and his warm breath fanning across her ear as they whispered their secrets. But here he was, now a man, and the memories rushed back in an overwhelming flood. She found herself leaning into him, remembering the familiar smell of lake water and pine trees, and drawing strength from their shared memories. They sat together in a daze, remembering all too well how they used to sneak out after curfew and lie together under the stars, counting constellations and promising to always find their way back to each other. The air around them was charged with an electricity that seemed to ignite every forgotten synapse in Zoe's brain. Tears welled up in Zoe's eyes, the forgotten memories crashing over her in waves. "I can't believe I forgot. We were so close that summer. But then I left, and everything just faded," Ethan finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were kids. I guess life just pulled us apart." They sat there for a moment, both reeling from the realization that their lives had crossed so deeply once before, only to be severed by time and circumstance. Zoe shed a tear as she looked into Ethan's eyes, the boy she had once known staring back at her from the man he had become. "How did we forget?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan shook his head. "I don't know. But maybe we weren't supposed to." Zoe smiled through her tears. It was all too surreal, too coincidental, and yet it felt as though the universe had guided them here, to this exact moment, for a reason. "We never said goodbye," she crooned. Ethan reached out and took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Maybe we didn't need to. Maybe we were always meant to find each other again." The connection between them, which had once been so fragile, now felt unbreakable. They had shared something special all those years, something they hadn't understood at the time but now recognized as a bond that had never truly been severed. Zoe's mind spun with the possibilities, a whirlwind of emotions she hadn't expected when she first stepped onto her mat tonight. It was as if the universe had realigned itself, placing Ethan in her path again after so many years of silence and separation. The connection they once shared, forgotten by time, now felt more palpable than ever, as if that bond had been waiting beneath the surface, dormant but never severed. She wasn't sure what it meant, this unexpected reunion, but she knew one thing for certain. She didn't want to lose him again. Not after all these years, not after they had been given a second chance. Life had a way of drifting people apart, of throwing obstacles in the path of connections that were meant to last. But this felt different. It felt like something they were meant to hold on to. "I don't want this to end here," Zoe said, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid to break the fragile spell that had settled over them. Ethan's smile was soft, a mixture of warmth and relief. His eyes, now filled with an understanding that hadn't been there before, met hers with the same intensity they had shared all those years ago. He squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. "It won't," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "Not this time." As they walked out of the studio side by side, the world around them seemed to hum with possibility. The streetlights cast a soft glow on the pavement, illuminating their path as they stepped into the cool evening air. The buzz of the city was a quiet backdrop now, distant and insignificant compared to the moment unfolding between them. Two strangers, once again connected by a thread that had never truly been broken. "So," she began, her voice steady but laced with excitement, "where do we go from here? Do you want to walk for a while?" Ethan asked, his tone casual but his eyes intense, searching mine for a sign. "Just talk?" "Yeah," I said, smiling as I took a step closer to him. "I'd like that." As we walked through the city, we found ourselves diving deep into conversation. We talked about our lives, who we had become, and what we had lost and gained over the years. He told me about his freelance work as a software developer and how it allowed him to travel and find solace in the solitude of new places. I shared my struggles, my failed relationships, and my career, which often left me feeling disconnected from the world. We talked about dreams, regrets, and all the things we thought we had left behind. And in that exchange, we began to understand not just each other, but ourselves. For so long, I had felt like I was wandering aimlessly, trying to find a sense of purpose that seemed just out of reach. But with Ethan, everything felt clearer. I realized how guarded I had been, afraid to let people in, to share who I truly was. Being with him felt like rediscovering a part of myself I had buried. Someone carefree, open, and willing to let life unfold without overthinking every step. He remembered me as that girl who laughed loudly, who loved to talk about the stars and what might be out there. And in his presence, I felt her coming back to life. Ethan, too, seemed to change as we walked together. He told me things he hadn't told anyone, things that had weighed him down over the years, the guilt of leaving his family behind, the fear that he would never find a place to belong. And I listened, really listened, not just to his words, but to him. We ended up at a park, the kind that is quiet and peaceful at night, with benches tucked away under the canopy of trees. We sat down, side by side, gazing up at the moon hanging low in the sky. It was like we had stepped out of time, just the two of us in this little bubble of stillness. "I feel like I'm seeing you for the first time," I said, turning to face him. "Not just the boy from my memories, but who you are now. And I like what I see." He reached out and took my hand, the warmth of his touch seeping into my skin. "I feel the same," he said. "It's like all those years were just leading us here. And maybe we had to go through everything we did to be ready for this. For us." The word "us" hung between us, feeling strange and new, yet comforting. I leaned my head on his shoulder, closing my eyes and letting myself sink into the moment. The past, the present, and the future seemed to merge together, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what might come next. We had lost each other once, but now, the universe had given us a second chance, and this time, we would make sure to hold on tight.